Today, it's a real honor to introduce Lou Canfield. Lou and I know each other well. He was a student at Hope College, and he graduated in 2001. While he was at Hope, he was student Congress president for 2 years and caused all sorts of trouble. But I can't tell you those stories. Lou graduated from Hope with a degree in political science and history. He went on to get his master's in public administration from Grand Valley University. And then he went on to Harvard, where he attended several executive institutes on local governance and state governance and the issues and agency issues that are along that. Lou began his career as the vice president of RWB Capital Management. He did that until 2007, when he joined the Grand Rapids government system. He first was the development center coordinator. He was the manager of the development center after that. And since 2020, he has been the chief of staff for the city manager of Grand Rapids. Prior to this, I met with Lou, and he and I discussed what he does on a daily basis. His need to work with constituents and issues and problems and budgets and governmental agencies was exhausting, to say the very least, for me. He thrives on that because he is a problem solver. He is a person that cares deeply about people. He is empathetic, but he's also solution-oriented. So without further ado, let's welcome Lou Canfield.
All right, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Right. And welcome to those online also. Richard, I appreciate the kind introduction. You actually reminded me of some things. I won't get into the trouble that he referred to, but it wasn't that bad. And he talked a little about my job, or at least kind of his impression of what that feels like, and I'll describe a little of that too. But welcome, and I'm pleased to be here with you today to talk about Grand Rapids, Portrait of an American City. And this is not advancing. I'll just use the arrow keys. So, what would a good government presentation be without a disclaimer? And so my disclaimer is simply that I'm here in my personal capacity. I created this presentation just for you today. I have not had it officially approved or endorsed or anything like that. But as Richard says, I've worked for the city for quite a while. And so I think you can rely on what I'm about to present to you. And the agenda for today, I'll give you a brief introduction about myself. I want to tell you some things about Grand Rapids. Some of them may be things you know, some may be surprising. I hope you learned some interesting facts about the city. I think it's important to think about how we view the concept of a city. And as a practitioner, I have to switch between different ways of viewing the city when I'm doing different types of work. So hopefully that'll make sense when we get there. Cities face lots of opportunities and also challenges. And so I want to share what some of those are, talk a little about city management in Grand Rapids. Some of the top level things that I see as part of the outlook for the future of Grand Rapids, and then of course Q&A. And I'll probably pause a couple times during the presentation in case you have questions. And if you give me a look, or if you raise your hand and you really want to ask something at a particular moment, I'm happy to entertain that. Okay, so about me, feel free to call me Lou. My friends at Hope College always called me Louie, and that's what Richard's wife, Sue, called me, and I really appreciated it. So that was a nice memory. So I studied history and political science. Richard mentioned student Congress. I also played trombone in the Wind Symphony, and I have a varsity letter, believe it or not, and it's in cheerleading. So one of my high school classmates who came to Hope was a cheerleader, a woman, and she really wanted, and the team really wanted, some men. And she twisted my arm, and I did that for several years. So I was born in Grand Rapids. I grew up in Whitehall. So those of you who are familiar with the Lakeshore That's just 10, 15 miles north of Muskegon. Of course, had a great experience at Hope, and then returned to Grand Rapids. I started working there a little before 2008, but I moved to Grand Rapids in 2008. Know a bit about investments. I did research, client interactions, earned my MPA. Richard mentioned the development center. That's the planning, permitting, inspection group. So I have quite a bit of experience with process improvement, helping difficult projects to get through regulatory processes and get approved and inspected and occupied. And now I'm in the executive office. I work closely with the mayor. So Mayor Bliss, some of you may be familiar with that name. She's term limited. Her final term actually ends at the end of this year. She's done a lot of great work for a couple decades at the city, and we'll miss her. I also work with city manager. In fact, I work directly for city manager Mark Washington. I've listed some interests, and I won't get into those in detail, but I think of myself as a thoughtful public administration practitioner, and I strive to make connections between theory, practice, and results. So that's me. And I'm curious, how many of you are currently living in Grand Rapids, if any of you? All right, how many of you have lived in Grand Rapids? All right, so, it's certainly, yeah, well, that's a good question. How many of you don't live there but work there or have worked there? All right, so good. So the majority of people here either have worked or lived in Grand Rapids. I'm sure all of you go there occasionally for some kind of event or activity. So it's really a lovely city. So it was a village in 1838. It was incorporated as a city in 1850. So that means we are very close, maybe a year and a few months away from its 175th anniversary. And so you will see at some point some announcements and plans to celebrate that, and those should be fun. It's governed by a 7-person body, so the mayor is elected at large. And there are 6 commissioners who represent 3 wards, 2 for each ward. There are a variety of appointed officials. So I mentioned the city manager. Other appointed officials are the city attorney, the city treasurer, and the clerk. So they're hired directly by the commission. And then there's all the people who actually process the permits and build the water infrastructure and approve the plans, and of course, things like collect taxes. And there's about 1,650 full-time employees. And a recent notable change is a shift from odd to even year elections. And I won't get into that in detail, but you can imagine a change in terms of the amount of attention paid to municipal issues, right? So in an even year election, you're going to get more turnout, more attention, but is a lot of that attention going to be on city issues? Probably not a lot of it. And, it's certainly more expensive to be part of that election. So it's kind of it's like many things, it's a trade-off. Grand Rapids population has increased by a little less than 5% in 12 years. Something that's not often thought of in connection with the challenges in the housing market, but I think is particularly significant, is household size goes down, right? So if household size goes down 10%, you have to build 10% more units just to have the same number of people housed. So something I encourage you to keep in mind when there's talk about housing, the need for housing, that you probably need even more than you think, because fewer people are living in each housing unit. Income has gone up. So if you look at that percentage, that's about it's about 30% more than CPI over that time. So it's not like people have a standard of living that's gone up 60%, but the standard of living has gone up. Percentage of residents who have a college degree has gone up. And not surprisingly, the land area stayed the same, surrounded by suburbs. I'm going to show you, going pretty quickly, some stats they're mostly Census Bureau stats on the city. And this one is a population pyramid. It's not exactly a pyramid, but it's, historically they've looked more pyramidal. But what you can see here is that Grand Rapids is a bit younger than the state. So the average age, or the median age in Grand Rapids is in the low 30s. And in Michigan, it's right around 40. So, that leads me to wonder, well, why is that? So there's a large population of young adults. Of course, there are opportunities in Grand Rapids. There are amenities, there are colleges. The healthcare industry has been growing. So you can think of those all as attracting people early in their career. And then you can see kind of an echo at the bottom. And that's probably, the people in that sort of bulge in the middle beginning to have children. So the population of children in Grand Rapids is stable, hopefully growing. Immigrants, there are more, the percentage of foreign-born persons in Grand Rapids is higher than the state as a whole. Not surprisingly, this goes along with that. The language spoken at home, other than English, which in Grand Rapids is predominantly Spanish, is about 16%, and that is more than in the state of Michigan. So as a government, we have to be mindful of, reaching people who are not as fluent in English, and so having simulcasts where public meetings are available in Spanish and translating many of our written materials. Income in Grand Rapids, the median income, pretty similar to the state. That sometimes surprises people because I think there's often an impression that urban areas just have inherently poor populations. And I think what is important to keep in mind is that that's not evenly dispersed. So if you think about disaggregating some of these statistics so that you can see them in different ways rather than just kind of the top line. Here on the left, you can see the disaggregated income. Well, excuse me, that is a map of the median household income, but then on the right is disaggregated for Black households. And I won't go through specific districts, but in general, although place does matter, but in general, the median income in Grand Rapids for a Black household is going to be less than the average. And that's true for other groups as well. Poverty, a little higher in Grand Rapids than the state as a whole, but not a lot higher. But then you think about, this is just another way of disaggregating. So, and this is specific to Grand Rapids. I don't think it's a pattern that's unique to Grand Rapids, but what is the age of the people who are in poverty? And the typical person in poverty is early to middle-aged adult. So it's a person who probably has less capacity to support him or herself based on where they are in life, and probably a variety of circumstances. Educational attainment, so reasonably high in Grand Rapids. I think you can attribute some of this to the colleges and universities there, where there are lots of faculty and staff employed, but they're also, of course, educating students. And also the healthcare industry. So Grand Rapids has a very large healthcare industry, Spectrum, Trinity, Mary Free Bed, and they employ lots of people, and some of the largest employers in our region, and quite a few of them have to have either bachelor's or advanced degrees. So that drives pretty high educational attainment. In terms of, again, disaggregating, so if you think about student diversity, so these are enrolled students in 2021, there's a slight overrepresentation of white students compared to the population as a whole. slight underrepresentation of Black and Hispanic and Latino students. Not a, it's not an enormous disparity, but it does exist relative to the general population. Employment, it's a very diversified economy. Like people still think of manufacturing and furniture and those types of things when they think of Grand Rapids. And, while those are still important, you can see that fourth from the bottom on the left-hand side. And I realize the print is small, so I'm going to read some of these, but fourth from the bottom, educational services, healthcare, and social assistance. So that's the largest category. Manufacturing, third from the top, is second largest. Professional scientific management, fifth from the bottom, third largest. And then retail is fifth from the top. So it is a diversified economy. Management type occupations, management science, the arts, those are the most common. And most people are working pretty close to 40 hours a week. Housing, as in most places, is getting more expensive. That number at the top, so median gross rent, just under $1,300 per month and rising. And that is not surprisingly a bit more than the median for the state. The home ownership rate is much lower. So a lot more renting in Grand Rapids than in the state as a whole. Home ownership rate's about 53%. And in Michigan, it's almost 3/4. In terms of health, there's a few more people, a greater percentage of the population without health insurance. 5.5% versus 4.5%. And with a younger population, that probably explains why the rate of disability is a bit less. So 13% in Grand Rapids versus almost 14.5% for the state. Families, I mentioned small households, young people. So those bars on the right are for men, blue, female are the yellow. And nearly half of the people in Grand Rapids have never been married. And roughly 38% are married. And so it probably goes with younger population and cultural trends. Race and ethnicity, Grand Rapids is nearly 60% white, and that has been pretty stable for almost 10 years. The share of the Black population is down a couple percent, and the Hispanic population is up slightly. But interestingly, the category that has really grown over the last 10 years is multiracial. And so that percentage has more than doubled from about 4 1/3 to about 9.5%. So multiracial. So becoming a more diverse community, but it's not as simple as saying, fewer white people, more Hispanic persons. Safety, people often think of cities as being, a bit riskier places to live. And while I don't have comparative stats with other cities, I do know that compared to the pandemic year of 2020, homicides are down. And so there were 38 in 2020 and cut approximately in half. 2021 have grown a little bit since then. Aggravated assaults are relatively flat. Interestingly, robberies have gone down significantly. So that's kind of contrary to what you may have seen in the news when people are talking about shoplifting and things like that. But we do have a question, but, so, you know, these kinds of property crimes in Grand Rapids, at least over a multi-year period, have been on the decline. Yes, sir.
Do you have any information on 2019?
No.
2020 is kind of an odd
Yeah,
year to start.
it certainly was. So I will, I'm happy to, after the presentation, see if I can find it and let you know, but I don't have that offhand. All right, so that's the kind of the demographic stuff. There was one question. Are there any others on kind of the census side of Grand Rapids? What do the numbers say?
It's not a census thing.
Okay,
What's the deal with northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest? Why can't it just be north, south, east, and west?
well, that well, that would be less symmetrical. Well, I suppose, you know, you do have in Grand Rapids, you do have this, as in many cities, kind of this grid system for streets. So you're wondering why northeast, northwest versus just north, south, east, and west? Yeah. Yeah. Right. I've worked with the Postal Service a lot, including to rename streets, which is not easy, but by design. So Grand Rapids is it's separated into quadrants, and if you want those quadrants to be meaningful, you have to think of the intersection of Fulton and Division. And so, you know, if you know what quadrant you're in, or if you know which of those directional designations pertain, then you kind of know where you are in relation to the city center. But apart from that, I don't have a great answer. There might be a city historian who could help with that. But what's that? Change. Well, even things that, you know, are debatable, once we change them, then we confuse a lot more people. You know, I mean, people are pretty adaptable. So
Yeah,
the Northeast. Yeah. Well, so who likes Northeast, Northwest, Southeast, Southwest? Who likes the other? Okay. I respect your opinion. I think the vote was maybe 69-1. But I do appreciate your question. Okay, so another question?
I'm just reading names there, and the only oddball one seems like Northeast Citizen Action. Where on earth did that come from?
That's a good question. It's actually the name of the association. And so it's a group that decided that they wanted their neighborhood to be named after the association. But as far as like why they chose that name, apart from kind of those active words of citizen action, I'm not sure. But they go by NECA. So that's one of the things that I get to know is the acronym pronunciations of these various places. The Grand Rapids has 37 neighborhoods, and 34 of them have neighborhood associations. They don't all. And they are unique places. We also have 6 of what are called corridor improvement authorities. So you might notice sort of a different look and feel in different parts of the city, maybe different amenities. And these corridor improvement authorities all have boards, plans, budgets, and improvements are funded through tax increments. So there's a sort of a baseline, and then as property taxes in that area grow, those are available to pay for some of those things. All right, so that's what the city proper looks like. And it's a unique shape. It's a shape that's been formed by a lot of growth over time, not in a while, but you know, the city was initially just I think a square mile, and then through annexation and other processes grew. But local government is complicated in Michigan. People kind of rely on a whole suite of services. The city provides some, county provides some, different authorities provide some. So what the city organization actually does is summarized here. Elections within the city, police and fire, courts, but the district courts, not the higher level courts. Community economic development, planning, infrastructure, some of the utilities, recreation opportunities, cemeteries, parking, mobility services. So if you've been down recently and you've seen the bikes and the scooters and things like that, the city has initiated those things, the library and the museum, a few others. The city is part of a metro area and is actually the city itself is the water provider for at least some of the communities in this metro area. And there are also some regional services like the bus service is not actually a city department. It's a regional authority. And we have Kent County, so you can see Grand Rapids, that shape that you saw a couple slides back is it's not central in Kent County, kind of southwest. And the county provides a lot of services that often the city is contacted to try and initiate something. So it's not unusual for us to get calls about the health department, but the city has relatively little to do with the health department other than coordinating them. But of course, county services include sheriff, prosecutor, in addition to the health department, things like register of deeds, drain commission, road commission, animal shelter. And then there's some that overlap, like elections and parks. And you kind of have to, based on where you are, who's doing what. And then we are, of course, part of the West Michigan region. And I'm sure everyone would define West Michigan differently. And so there are two, and both of these definitions leave out Muskegon. But there are a couple different planning organizations. So the one on the left is more focused on transportation, planning, some environmental and utility type things. And the one on the right, so that's the Grand Valley Metro Council is the one on the left. The one on the right is West Michigan Regional Planning Commission, which has a bit more of a focus on smaller communities. So even West Michigan has kind of a governance role, but a bit more abstract than kind of the concrete city services. So I have a slide right after this one, which is what I see. But based on all that, is there anything in particular that stands out for you that was new, surprising, unsurprising? Yes, ma'am. Richard will bring you the microphone.
It's the first city in the country to introduce fluoride into its water.
That is true. Yes, indeed. Thank you for mentioning. We have a sculpture dedicated to that. And there are people who call to say, stop doing it. So there are diverse opinions. Yes, sir.
Question. Well, when you showed like the West Michigan Planning Commission, do you ever have conflicts on plans? Like if the planning commission of the county and a regional planning commission of the city have different plans for the future development, how does that work out?
Yeah. So those planning commissions have advisory councils, working groups, and so depending on the topic area, the various represented communities tend to work those things out at that level. I haven't seen something kind of bubble up to a top level where there was some kind of significant disagreement. My guess is they either work it out or it doesn't make it. Whatever the idea is, doesn't make it out. That said, there has to be some give and take among communities. There might be a community that wants a 2-lane road with a center turn lane, and the other one might want 4 lanes. And somehow they work it out without it being a major point of strife. But thank you for that question. All right, well, what I see is a Grand Rapids that is youthful, as I mentioned, but getting older. Dynamic, but with some stable features. Diverse, but majority white, and has been for quite some time. Educated and hardworking. Not everybody's single, but a lot of single people, but still pretty family friendly. Getting more expensive. But that means different things to different people. There's certainly some people who can deal with the increased expense just fine. It's very, can be very difficult for others. Both professional and working class. I think that's a noteworthy feature of Grand Rapids. I experience it, and I think the data indicates that it's a relatively safe community, but people are anxious about safety. It's in the safety issues are in the news a lot. When something bad happens, it's certainly going to be covered. And then I think Grand Rapids is future oriented, but it does have a traditional kind of feel to it as well. It's about some of the buildings, the institutions, other things that have been around for a long time. All right, so that's a lot of what I know about Grand Rapids, and I didn't want to bore you with any more. So as a practitioner, when I confront an issue or a problem, whether conscious or unconscious, I have to have some model for what is the city. What if anything can be done to make this better, to fix it, to improve people's lives. And so there are different ways of seeing a city. And I'll give you some examples of either recent or kind of well-known situations that highlight this. So city is a machine, right? So systems, mechanisms, complicated, kind of infrastructure focused. How do we make things work? And so many of you probably heard about the recent boil water advisory, right? So that's a perfect example of like the machine malfunction. And what do you do to fix it as quickly as possible, limiting the impact of that malfunction as much as possible? So city is a machine. And I do have to rely on this one sometimes. I also thought of this one, the city as something more like a mosaic. So Grand Rapids is diverse, a lot of unique cultures and people, and yet they all fit together and mostly live harmoniously together. And so, Grand Rapids celebrates this kind of diversity through things like Art Prize. So have any of you gone to Art Prize downtown, gone to some of the venues? So you can see quite a range of art. We also have the Springtime Festival of the Arts that'll be coming up pretty soon. And then we have lots of special events and the neighborhoods, the various neighborhoods that all have different feels that I mentioned earlier. So, this is something that helps me keep in mind that there's more to Grand Rapids than just my own personal perspective. We need to value all of our people and cultures. I struggled with the wording on this one. I thought about something like city as combat or city as arm wrestling or something like that. But arena seemed to, and I don't mean it's about sports, although that's certainly could fit too, but human interactions where not everybody gets along, right? And so that's just how it's going to be in any society, in any community. And so if you think of the city as an arena it's a place where people are going to struggle a little bit, and we're going to hopefully work things out. And so I noted competition, especially political and economic. How many of you been to a public meeting recently? So that feels kind of like an arena. You know, at some of our more recent public meetings, we've had a lot of comment on things like, you know, on more of a tamer level, things like housing policy. How are these zoning changes going to affect my community? And costs and benefits, and things like homelessness. Now, there will be one group of people who are much more focused on how do we help these unhoused individuals, and then there'd be another group of people saying like they're camped on this, you know, the stoop leading into my business, and that doesn't work. A lot of concerns that have been expressed about policing, and at least a couple of our meetings, many of the public comments have been wanting the city commission to do something about the Israel Hamas conflict in Gaza. Of course, the city commission doesn't really have much to do with that, but it still marks the city as an arena where people sometimes have differing points of view. This is the one I deal with a lot. The city is a legal construct, so laws, regulations, planning, policy making, architects, engineers. This is really about, you know, how do we make sure people are accountable, treated fairly, so on and so forth. So often, you know, in solving problems, it can be easy to say, well, we just need a new rule, or we need to change a rule. And that can seem deceptively easy. But if people don't know about or follow or understand the rule, then that might not work. Getting much more abstract. So the city is also kind of like an organism, a body. Here the focus is on interconnection. So instead of, you know, kind of legalistic frame of mind, thinking about like, well, I just changed this thing, I changed this rule, and everything adapts. Well, I think here it's much easier when considering the city as an organism to think about some of the maybe unintended consequences and interdependencies. So, so a good example might be, well, we do road construction. Well, road construction is an opportunity to make something better. It's also a blockage for a while. You know, a lot of this is unseen. So there's a lot within a body that is unseen, but very important. And there's a lot that goes on in the city that is unseen, but still very important. And then this is the last one. So the last of my metaphors as an ecosystem. And this is a picture of the Fulton Street Farmers Market that some of you have been to. But this is much more focused on dynamic interactions. And so a couple that I thought of, well, one main one that I thought of is the housing ecosystem. So everybody wants more housing, cheaper housing, maybe not more housing in my neighborhood, but more housing somewhere. And I'd actually be fine with more housing in my neighborhood. But so that's a complicated ecosystem. And it might seem appealing to just spend more money on it. And of course, that's going to help. But the ecosystem is homeowners, buyers, renters, the unhoused, politicians, developers, contractors, banks. And you change something in that system, people are going to adapt. And so, you know, you put a lot more money into housing. Well, if you don't put a lot more materials into housing, then you might get less than you think at greater cost. There's also this thing called human-centered design. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's the idea that you really factor in, focus on how are people going to react to this thing you're doing, or start with what you want to accomplish and back up and try and figure out, all right, what is the sequence of decisions, actions, and so on that we hope people will take once we to get to the thing that we're trying to do. So why did I go through all those? Well, I want you to have a sense for how I have to think during my work, while doing my work, and I often have to kind of shift between different ways of thinking. So it's complicated. It helps to reveal that there isn't just one authority in our city. It's kind of fragmented, but interdependent. Encourages me to be humble, that I'm not able to control as much as maybe I'd like to. And it also kind of points towards some prescriptions or solutions, but it's not adequate. So, and I think this is where a Hope College education and some of the thoughtful and at times spiritual practices that I learned here are useful. So none of these are sufficiently explanatory, and they don't totally reflect what people do. And so what's missing? And I think what's missing is that most people, despite what we might see or read, watch on television, most people I know actually seem innately social, cooperative, and productive. And those aren't the people I see on TV, but those are the people I meet. And of course, we know that we have a nature that can be suspicious, selfish. You know, most people actually are negative. They think things are going to happen that don't actually turn out as badly as they fear. So even without, even knowing all that, and without a single authority or vision, we still organize, we still stick together, and cities still prosper. And what explains this? And I think there's something, something above us, something higher than us, that helps to explain why we have societies and they work. All right, so moving on. So these are city challenges. I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but I'll cover the ones that might be less intuitive. So always one, fiscal sustainability. Maintaining infrastructure. We've talked about affordable housing. We haven't talked much about economic development, but that's a challenge. Public safety, even in a city like Grand Rapids that has not geographically expanded in a long time, we have to adjust. So Grand Rapids is building a new fire station, and it's because as a less populated part of the city, the southeast side gets greater and greater population, more congested roads, all that. City hasn't gotten larger, but we need a new fire station. That should be done late next year, early the following. Homelessness, housing, social services, sustainability. So this is a very important conversation we're having where, yes, the city is taking some action to reduce our carbon emissions and hoping to be at carbon neutral in the next 5 or so years. But it's also very important to focus on resiliency. So the city doesn't, really have a huge amount of influence over what happens with the climate, but we do have to be prepared to adapt. Cybersecurity. So if you followed the news recently, there was that, I think healthcare financial processing group that was hacked. Bad actors are trying to hack all kinds of organizations, including governments all the time. Digital divide, so making sure that people have access to opportunity. And the last ones I want to highlight on here are zoning, so land use and zoning. So that is currently being worked on through a new master planning process. So we're coming up on the end of that. And it's been something that's involved thousands of residents through lots of different engagement sessions and is going to lead to a revised zoning ordinance. And then some new opportunities and changes in Grand Rapids. Civic trust and transparency. That's definitely a topic that that needs our attention. People, a lot of people seem to feel less heard and included in government decision making. So we have a relatively new lead person for community engagement, and they are working on a new strategy and trying to be much more inclusive in terms of our processes and decision making. And of course, I mentioned demographic changes, and those will continue. So we have opportunities to respond to these challenges through technology, through sustainable development processes. So one of those would be something called transit-oriented development. So trying to have more of our dense, high-rise development clustered near bus and other transit amenities. Public-private partnerships. So in Grand Rapids, with some of the lead philanthropists whose names you know, we are working on some transformative projects. You may have, and I'll share more about those in a minute, but you may have read about the amphitheater, the soccer stadium, some of the development that we hope happens around those on the southeast part of downtown. And those would not be possible without lots of stakeholders coming to the table, including philanthropists through these public-private partnerships. Equity and inclusion. So one of the city's core values is equity. And we have some levers to reduce disparities through how we do economic development, how we hire organizations that we choose to partner with. I mentioned climate resilience. There is transit-oriented development specifically. Alternative energy. So there's a landfill. I don't know if you've heard of the Butterworth landfill. It was a Superfund site, or is a Superfund site. And so it's a capped landfill. There's very little that can be done with it, other than one of a few options is to put solar arrays on this capped landfill and use that to produce energy. So the city has its own grid that powers the street lighting system, city facilities, traffic signals, all these kinds of things. And within the next few years, there are plans to have solar panels on that landfill and to power all that stuff with solar energy. And there probably is enough land there to generate even more besides that. And different possibilities for how to use that energy are being discussed. All right, so how do we manage a city? Grand Rapids is a council manager government. So it's not a strong mayor government. Are these terms that are familiar to you? So The quickest way to explain it is in a council manager system, the city council hires a CEO. And in a strong mayor system, the mayor is the CEO. And so Grand Rapids is a council manager system. It has been for a long time, I think since 1916 or thereabouts. So they have their advantages and disadvantages. And as a loyal Grand Rapidian in a council manager system, I listed 4 advantages for that one and only 3 for the other. But so the system I work in is thought to be more professional, less partisan, more stable. And with the elected officials focusing more on policy than trying to carry out the policy. And then in the strong mayor system, you've got the CEO who is a person who is directly elected. So it's thought to be potentially more accountable, maybe able to act more quickly and decisively, maybe more visionary. But they both have their kind of weaknesses that you have to guard against. So in a system that's more professionalized, staff-driven, the thought is that you have to guard a little more against things like bureaucracy or disconnection from the public. And under the other system, guard a bit more against instability, maybe the lack of experience. They could be very experienced, but potential lack of experience of the elected person who's acting as CEO, and also the possibility of over-personalization. So we have this professionalized executive structure. We try to implement our policies and programs strategically. So here you can see we've got our city mission, vision and values, and then our budgetary and programmatic priorities. So these are the things that the city manager in partnership with the city commission so have defined as what the organization is going to be focused on. This is very tiny, but I want you to get a sense for, and I'm not going to read them all, but this is our city commission's list of focus areas. So I mentioned those 6 categories, so the priorities from back here on the bottom right. So within those priorities, we've got all these programs and initiatives, and a lot of them relate to what I was talking about earlier in terms of sustainability, both fiscal and environmental. Some of those major projects, public safety, transit, mobility, all that. So you can see, from a general strategy, we work down to a lot of projects and programs, and these are the things that we're working on starting, we're doing differently. There's a whole lot besides this that's actually working fine and just continuing that. Again, very small, but this is the leadership structure of the organization. So the organization has 35 departments. And one of the points I try to make here is these are like 35 small to medium-sized businesses. So one of the largest departments in the city is the police department. And with their civilian and uniformed officer staff, they're under 500 people, right? So that'd be kind of a medium-sized business. But we have departments in the city of 2 people. And we have departments doing everything from incentivizing businesses to running a water utility. And so, think about a business. This is the kind of business you would describe as a conglomerate, right? And it's doing things that in our society we entrust to government. It's very complicated to have an organization that does that array of things all under one set of leaders. So it's a very diverse and complicated organization. So I showed you that chart that had all those bullet points on it, but these are really, I think, the key things that we're working on now. housing, homelessness, public safety, not just policing, but how do we work with community to have community members help interrupt cycles of violence? So the answer isn't always more patrols. They can help, but there's other approaches too. Lead safety, people often talk about water, but the real concerns are about paint, lead paint in homes. So we have some new things we're working on there to try and help. I mentioned we have a lot of rental properties. People are renting, aren't as familiar with their home as people who have lived there a long time. So some programs to help renters be better aware of, is there lead in the home, or at least the potential for it, and what can they do to have a safer environment. Materials management, it's very much about the environment and dealing with waste. And then parking in an urban area, people are always going to want to fix parking. Always want more parking. As we get into our next budget session, and this is the current budget, which ends, the budget year ends June 30th. So we're working on the next year's budget. And a few things we're confronting is there was a lot of federal and state money that flowed to cities during COVID. And some of that kind of hangs around on the books and has made things easier fiscally than they otherwise would have been. So we're in the twilight of those. And that's leading to a much closer balance between funding and needs. We're making some major capital investments, so that requires issuing some debt. And we're focused on customer service and equity in terms of how we invest in those 3 wards and neighborhoods. We're almost to the end. I think I've got like 4 more slides, maybe 5. So transformational projects, what are you going to see in the next 10, 15 years? Some of these you're going to see very soon and you're already reading about, but Grand River Greenway, I know there's a Macatawa Greenway, isn't there? So this is kind of like that, but urban and with a lot that's going to happen downtown along the riverfront to make it more usable, inviting, and accessible. Are you familiar with the property just north of 196 through downtown, right along the river? There's that, it's on Monroe, several blocks. So that's going to become a very nice park space. And then also along the river, but south of the S curve, there will be a very nice outdoor amphitheater. GVSU is adding a digital learning lab to their downtown campus. And then for those of you who fly a lot, the airport towers. But that's going to enable other more interesting things at the airport. MSU Innovation Center. So this is something, so this is on the corner of Monroe and Division, or excuse me, yes, Michigan and Monroe. And so this is a building where there are lots of startup businesses in biomedical health and other innovative spaces, place for them to start up in Grand Rapids. A soccer stadium, the rendering here is out of date. It will not be on the river and it will actually be a little larger. But the intent is to build a soccer stadium by the Y. Market Avenue, so continuing on south from the amphitheater, so that would be near the S curve, continuing on south from there. Hopefully some development in terms of a lot of housing, other mixed uses. Someday soon, maybe a regional draw aquarium. convention center expansion, so more space for visitors to come when we have some kind of event or convention in town. And then who knows when this might happen, but there's talk of relocating the post office. And that could open up some interesting space for redevelopment. But usually the federal government doesn't pay for that. They want somebody else to pay to move the post office, and then you can do what you want. So that's the set of transformational projects. There will always be surprises. Some of those might not happen, but those are the kinds of things that I think you can look for over the coming 10 to 15 years. I also think that the future holds more localism. So the reason I say that, there is progress that happens at the state and federal levels, but there's a lot of political and fiscal things happening there where I think might just be harder to solve problems than at the local level. So I think there's going to be increasing reliance on cities, counties, those types of units to solve more problems. I also think that there's more focus on local positive outcomes, whereas the more abstract, the farther away you get, the more kind of negative, critical, things can be where it's might be harder to solve problems. It might be harder to see that problems are being solved. So I think the proximity of local governments can lead to increased trust. People can talk to their mayor, people can talk to their council member, to employees, ask questions, get answers. And I think there's often a lot of care and involvement that city and county staff have in their communities. And then, of course, I mentioned before philanthropy and some of the big donors who have given to local projects to help build up the community. So, and then on the right, I just mentioned so that's kind of the why I think we're in a period of moving toward localism. But then what you can see on the right, some of the benefits that could flow from that. And then I think there's this question of what makes for a good life. So I talked a little bit earlier about okay, as a Hope College graduate, what does that make me open to in terms of why does a city work? That it's not all about kind of the technocratic stuff. I think Hope is also a place where you spend time as a student thinking about well, what is a good life? What did I not put on this list? I didn't put email or smartphones or social media. I mean, we have a lot of that stuff, but I don't get a sense that in the quantity we currently have it, that it's contributing to a good life. But the statement I put on the right, if you think of a city like Grand Rapids as an ever-transforming, generally improving, I chose a generic word, platform, where people, groups, and communities can live a good life. Well, what does that look like? And to me, that looks like being able to live a life of happiness and gratitude, being in a place where I belong and can make a difference, having some faith and optimism for the future, having options, opportunity, cultural amenities, a sense of beauty, health, wellness, wholeness, and whatever else you want to put in there. That's the question mark there. But I think a city like Grand Rapids is a place where people of a variety of backgrounds, abilities, and really goals can lead a good life. So that's really what it's about, is creating a city where that's possible. And with that, Be happy to take any other of your questions. And I know I've got a question to look up the answer to after we're done. But I really appreciate your attention. I hope it was interesting. And forgive me for the small text. If I'd made it bigger, there would have been even more slides.
We have one question from
Yes.
our virtual viewers. I hear that there is interest in West Michigan for big companies. Land from Grand Rapids to the lake will be all wildlife. Is that familiar to you? What about farms and wildlife?
Yeah, so those are not part of the city of Grand Rapids, so we don't have direct policy-making authority over that subject. But I do know that it is of particular interest to Kent, and I think you're probably, the question's probably even more about Ottawa and maybe Muskegon counties, where there are land preservation initiatives and there are programs available at a variety of levels to help farmers who want to, keep farming, have some ability to do so. But, we do live in a mostly free market society. And so if somebody really wants to convert a farm into housing or manufacturing or whatever, it can be difficult to stand in the way.
I actually have a couple of questions. The first one is, it seems like it's been decades that we've been hearing about the possible removal of the dam downtown.
Oh,
Rerouting of the river. I wonder what the status of that is.
Mhm.
And then also you indicated that the city council makeup is nonpartisan. I'm curious how it reflects the diversity of the population of the city.
All right, thank you for the question. So on the river, which is a very high priority for the mayor, and for a lot of other staff, including the city manager, there should be progress on that. I'm not saying it will be done, but I think you will see a start to it very soon. And then in terms of the makeup of the city commission, it actually today is majority female. And it is, I think 3 of the 6 members are African American, and 1 is Latina and Native American. And so, it's a pretty diverse group. So, I mean, it's definitely the most diverse elected body we've had.
What is the plan with all these improvements to expand the commuter system? Is there any type of extending out for those people who work in Grand Rapids and live elsewhere, or work elsewhere and live in, vice versa? Is there a rail system planned, or expanding it out 30, 40 miles out?
Yeah. So there's not a rail system planned as of now. Rail is very expensive. There are a couple of bus rapid transit lines, which are about as close as you can get to rail without having them. Now, those are not the city's services. They're the rapid, and the city is a member in that system, but it's a regional system. But there are efforts being made to have more outlying parking lots, so people who want to can park, get on the bus rapid transit, get into town. There's also a need, once people get downtown and they, depart the bus, how do they get their last mile or last couple miles to wherever they're going? And that's where things like, for those who want to use such things, the e-bikes, scooters, those have been helpful for some. But there also is now an experiment being made with car share, where the city is going to pilot a car share where somebody can have a nap and they can, rather than having a car, they could get off the bus and use the car share. So it's really it's on both ends, right? It's how do you get from where you're coming from to mass transit and then from there to your destination. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Rick Byrne. I'm a transportation consultant, or at least I do that. And I've got about 3 questions, and she's just brought up a major one. One of the major concerns that Grand Rapids does not do, that many cities are doing, they don't empower bus drivers like on the Division line and those. So the bus driver comes up, let me take a nap, it's the red light. Because the argument is that autos in Grand Rapids have priority over bus passengers. If the bus driver had like a garage door opener, which cities do have, they could go through the lights and keep moving except boarding passengers. That would make a tremendous change in people probably be interested in buses. My bigger question is that people that arrive on intercity transportation, we're getting 2 more trains into Holland and Grand Rapids. You've got Indian Trails bus, arrive in a dump. I mean, it's probably one of the most unappealing cities in the world to arrive by train in. What is Grand Rapids going to do to improve the neighborhood? I mean, I would happen to be down there one day on a political thing, and a Indian Trails bus came in and 2 people had to get off. The restrooms were locked because Rapid will not service Rapid will not work with Indian Trails and Amtrak.
Yeah.
How can you cope with that?
So are you referring to the wealthy interchange area where you've got
The brand new
the
Amtrak
bus?
station.
Okay. Okay, well, so I, as far as I am aware, the bus rapid transit does have some signal prioritization. The Silver Line, the Laker Line. But I don't think the regular routes do. But there actually are certain intersections in Grand Rapids where if it's bus rapid transit, they'll pull up to a station and you might have a bunch of cars queued up out in the center lanes, and the bus will actually get a signal first so that it can go. So it's not everywhere, but there's at least some attempt to prioritize those, help them keep on their schedule. As far as the wealthy, so the 131 wealthy area where you have the Amtrak station, I think the Rapid Central station is right there too.
City buses do not go to Rapid. They're a city bus, they go to the Amtrak.
Yeah, right. So are you asking about the connection between those or just the general environment?
10 o'clock at night, don't be trashy. You say this is a trashy city. How does Grand Rapids go? You get off the train in a dumpy area and say this is people say this is a trashy city. How is Grand Rapids going to change that image?
Sure. So there are plans in partnership with MDOT, because I think the area you're describing is actually kind of down underneath. Is that the area sort of down underneath wealthy? So there are plans to totally redesign, reconfigure that interchange. And what I'm not sure of is what is being integrated in those plans to improve that situation. So I'm gonna find out. Yeah.
Question from online. I'm not understanding this.
What has been the ask of the city of Grand Rapids related to the immigrant situation? And or what is the thought process of the city of Grand Rapids related to the immigrants and whether they should be opening their arms and helping Texas and Florida or?
So there has not been an influx into Grand Rapids of migrants thus far. We have with partners had conversations about what would we need to do to respond if there were to be. And so there are some kind of early stage contingency plans. And a lot of that has to do with housing, social supports, because there's I think it's a 5-month period where even a person who's in the country with seeking asylum status doesn't have the right to work. So you have people who are in the country who need services, don't have the ability to work. And so I think that the most I can say is we haven't seen it, but we are taking steps to be prepared and have a sense of what the need would be.
Okay, we have another question online. I believe you mentioned new zoning rules. Can you please give a brief view as to how anything will change in Grand Rapids?
Yes, so the package of zoning changes that a public hearing was held on a couple weeks ago is intended to create more housing development opportunities, so the ability to build more units in certain places than is the case now. If you've heard of things like accessory dwelling units, so sometimes those are referred to as like a granny flat or something like that, to create more opportunities for those, to potentially allow for more unrelated occupants in a unit, to allow for things that are a bit more like rooming houses of the past than have been allowed more recently. So it's those kinds of things. Letting, and again, I'm speaking very generally, there's more specific rules on like where and what the approval process is and all that, but allowing what we have now to be used to house more people, and then what's built to be built for more people. And there are neighborhoods that welcome that. There are neighborhoods that are maybe on the fence. There are others where they're not opposed to everything, but they have concerns wanting to preserve their neighborhood character. So a lot of that is about like, how do you have change yet still preserve what people like about their neighborhood?
I remember reading 4 or 5 years ago that the dream of returning the river through the city to its natural flow has limitations so that can't fully be achieved. Can you address that?
So I'm not sure. I don't. So by returning it to its natural flow. So I don't know the answer specifically. However, what I can say is we're still going to have floodwaters. Like the city is still going to be protected from floods. And so that's not as it was. What is definitely planned is to remove all those dams. And so, that gets it closer. And there's a desire to have it usable for recreation by people of a range of interests and abilities, right? It's not all going to be dramatic whitewater. So anytime you do that, you say, well, we're still going to protect the city from flood, and we're going to, have opportunities for everybody. You're probably already committing to not have it exactly as it was. But the desire is to have it be natural feel.
This may tie in a little with that question. Grand Rapids is a big city, but it's also part of a county. Our county got a big change this last, couple months, years ago, and it really changed. Is there a potential that people were watching and said, hey, what about us? Do we all agree with the way things are run? Grand Rapids is a big city. It may be a way to think of things, but small towns have a way of coming in. I'm just curious if there's anything that the community of Holland is, Grand Rapids is considering about what happens to counties around it and things?
Well, I'm here in a nonpartisan capacity. So, hopefully have a presentation that's of interest to people across the political spectrum. What I will say is, Kent County, is also a diverse place. There are communities that are farming communities, much more rural, and then you've got Grand Rapids, which, Grand Rapids at 200,000 people is less than half the count. Now it's surrounded by these suburbs that are also kind of mid-sized cities. So most of the people who live in the county are urban, suburban. But are there, is there the full diversity of opinions in Kent County that there is in Ottawa County? I'm sure there is. But that's where we get back to that image of the arena or whatever, right? Like people have to engage and make clear what they want and try and get it.
One question, how does Mayor Bliss fit into the city's organizational structure? If it's not a strong mayor city, how does she fit in?
Yeah. So the mayor, she leads the city commission. So we've got the 7-member body, those 6 commissioners plus the mayor. So she leads them, including in their formal public meetings. She is the city's lead spokesperson, right? So she represents the city. She's the only person with the authority to sign contracts. She, with the city commission, hire those 4 appointed officials and hire and review their performance. So the city manager, treasurer, clerk, attorney. So she's not the CEO, but she's got a very influential role. And interestingly, in Grand Rapids, and the mayor can put in as much time as she or he wants, but the mayor is thought of in terms of the charter and kind of the structure as a part-time role.
Okay.
But sometimes part-time is a lot of hours.
I had a question about how the city management works with the school department in Grand Rapids.
So there is a city and GRPS leadership team. So the city manager, the mayor, the superintendent, some of the school administrators, they meet to talk about key topics and issues regularly. There's often collaboration involving facility use. The city has, if the school wants to sell some property, the city has right of first refusal, like if we wanted to, to buy it and use it for a particular thing or make it into a park or something like that. So there's a lot of collaboration, but what is often not realized, especially by people moving in from another large city, is the school is not a city department. In a lot of big cities it is, but there's collaboration on facilities and like, we had to coordinate very closely on the water situation, right? That was one of the first. So the ability to fight fires and the ability to have students be safe were 2 of the first things that we had to work on as soon as we knew that there was a water issue. So we worked closely with them.
Are there any other questions? If not, let's say thank you to Lou for a great presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.